Welcome to How to Decorate from Ballard Designs, a weekly podcast all about the trials and triumphs of decorating and redecorating your home. I'm Caroline, I'm on the marketing team.
And I'm Taryn, and I'm a product designer.
I'm Liz, I head up the creative team.
We're your hosts! Join the expert team at Ballard Designs for tips, tricks, and tales from interior designers, stylists, and other talents in the design world.
Plus, we'll answer your decorating dilemmas at the end of each episode.
We love answering your questions, so don't forget to email us at podcast@ballarddesigns.net.
Now, on with the show.
We're back for part 2 of my conversation with Ben Pentreath. Liz was under the weather and Taryn was in France. So it's just me and Ben, but we had a great conversation about his book and English Vision. And if you haven't listened to part 1, go do that and then come back here and listen to part 2, which we'll get to right now.
How interesting to have truly both sides of the scale. You've got, a part of your business doing the interior architecture, and you're planning everything from moldings and tile work and layouts, but then all the way up to
lampshades, everything. It's a bit crazy.
Yeah.
It goes back to maybe what I was first talking about when we were chatting. I'm really conscious that your blog is called, your podcast is called How to Decorate.
We'll get there. We'll
get there, people. Yeah, sorry for making you wait. In part 2, we'll do How to Decorate. So no, I've got this crazy brain. It bubbles around. I'm interested in everything. It's really hard to sort of say, I'm just going to focus on this and not that. Obviously, there's a danger in all of these things that you become jack of all trades, master of none. And that is a danger, actually. And then we have to work really, really hard to make sure that as well as having breadth in our design studio and a huge breadth of interest and areas that we're engaged in, then you have to dig really deep and you have to have the depth as well. And that's to do with having a fantastic group of people who have worked, some of whom have worked with me for many years now. Some are still fairly new, and we love to have people who stay in our office for a long time. At some stage, I'm going to leave, and I suddenly realized a few years ago, like, wow, okay, when it's time for me to leave, actually, there's an amazing group of people here, and it's not all just going to fizzle out when I'm out of here, which is quite an exciting thought.
And cool that you made did you not make your firm employee owned?
Yes. A couple of years ago now, 3 years ago, we did that. And that was me giving quite a lot of thought as to, what is the best way to create a studio that has, real longevity for the long term. And also knowing, which is a little strange, but knowing that I didn't want to carry on working at the pace, necessarily that I do at the moment for the rest of my life. An awful lot of architects and designers have a bit of a tendency to think, not only do they think they're complete genius, I'm a genius, but they also think that the longer they live, the more genius they get, and the more. And I actually have a theory that everyone in life has moments where it's great to be like really doing a lot, and then actually I'm really looking forward to slightly changing my pace a little bit. I've recently spent a tiny bit more time with the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, and teaching and doing little bits of teaching at Cambridge University and stuff like that, which I've really enjoyed. And it's a whole different perspective, and that's fun. And it's totally different. And I think, you can't go on and on forever going, yeah, right, I'm doing this, that, and the other. I've got to do everything. It's good to have a change of pace. So the employee ownership is the first step that I've really made to kind of to get the practice on that journey, so that when it's time for me to take a back seat, there's a really strong sense of ownership, corporate ownership within the firm, and it's not owned by just one shareholder. Sure. or an outside body. It's owned by everyone who works there.
Yeah, that's
While
amazing.
you work there, you get if there are dividends to be had, it goes to everyone in the office, which is pretty cool. So it's a great system which was set up a few years ago in the UK, and it's been very popular actually with design firms. It's not just me. So it's really good. And But so, yeah, so it is this question of having a broad sense on everything, but then digging deep. And so we've got people who just work on the master planning projects or just work on individual houses or architecture. And then we've got a fantastic team in the decoration who just work on the decoration of some of the houses. And obviously, if we're lucky enough to be designing a new house or major alterations to a house, the architectural hat, where we're also engaged to be the interior designer, interior decorator, that's really fun because it's different people in the office, different sides of the office, working together on a unified team. And it's not to say, we do decorate houses where we're not the architect, and we work on lots of houses where we're the architect but not the decorator. But it's lovely when you get to do both.
Sure,
it's really fun.
Well, okay, let's change gears to the decoration a little bit. We are how to decorate, but we don't always get to talk about architecture on the podcast. So the
fascinating thing is that I find that all the stuff we have just been talking about, it's amazing how interested people are in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really fascinating. People really get it. They're really into it. It's really interesting. The town side of it is the thing that people just find the most fascinating.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I absolutely loved that element of the book. And I would encourage everyone to read the book, if you're interested in that at all. As far as the decoration, gosh, I was so surprised and struck by the breadth of style, I suppose. There's some very colorful spaces. I loved your flat in London.
Yeah.
All of the color and saturation of the patterns. And then there are some much more, I suppose, calm. I
Gentle.
Loved the, I believe it was the client who was Swedish, and she had that beautiful white kitchen. That almost had an austerity to it, I suppose. And
almost a modernist, abstracted space. Yeah, although it's got classical moldings. Yes, absolutely.
So how do you dig into the project as far as the decor goes, and approach it differently for each project?
Well, I think, I talk about that a little bit in terms of, I'm always, that we all know decorators who do the most fantastic work, where you can open a magazine or a book and you can see a single photograph, and in one go, you will be correct. You can name the decorator. And that might well be true of me as well. Full disclosure, I might be one of those people. But very often you can name the decorator because they sort of have a very individual style, which they're going to impose is the wrong word, but they're going to place on any project, any building, any site. And obviously it will have local variations or historical variations or regional variations. Obviously all great decorators and designers are responsive to the individual needs of the building or the client or the climate or whatever it might be. Like somebody who might be one of these decorators designing a beach house in the Caribbean, it's not going to look the same as if it's a ski lodge in Aspen.
Right.
We get that. But there are still these things which are, identifiable.
They have a lens.
Yeah, exactly. A lens is a very nice way of describing it. And for myself, I change my mind on decoration the whole time anyway, just at home. I don't know if anyone else does, but I quite like changing things out. Like one minute you might want your kitchen one color, and the next minute you might want it another color, and that's fine. It's paint. It's pretty easy. It's sort of it's a great way of changing up life and keeping it fresh. I think one of the things I talk about in the book is slightly to do with the sort of velocity, the speed of the rhythms of time, you might want to call it, where if we're doing the architecture or the urbanism in particular, if you design a street and you get it in the right place, leading from somewhere to somewhere, you kind of have a hunch that street might be there for thousands of years, because there are many streets in London that are thousands of years old, right? All of the buildings have come and gone. The street is now 6 feet higher than it was when it was first laid out, but the street is in the same place. It's a very profound, long time period. Architecture obviously comes and goes. There are buildings which are in England which are hundreds of years old. There aren't many buildings which are thousands of years old. And there are, lots of buildings that are 30 years old that we all have a probably suspicion will be demolished within our lifetime, which is also really horrific when you're thinking about sustainability, but that's another subject. And then you have decoration, where actually, really sweetly, that flat you just mentioned, the one in Regent's Park, my lovely client has now moved out to the country, and she sold that apartment. And I can tell you that entire flat has been ripped to shreds by the new owners. It's life. It comes and goes. Many, many famous rooms by famous decorators. You know, we could think about
Billy Baldwin, or
Billy Baldwin, David Hicks, John Fowler, Sybil Colfax, you know, Siri Morm, you know, famous, like if anybody reads the World of Interiors magazine, you know, fantastic Mitch Owens, you know, every month is kind of like showing us, you know, amazing books in history of rooms which are actually 20, 30, 40 years old. We don't mind that. That for me is not unsustainable. It's not unsustainable to say it's time to change the decoration, because decoration to assess that is to do with like fashion and change and just refreshing your life. You're allowed to do that. It's always good to think about longevity. It's always good to think about the key, you know, structural pieces. Like, it really breaks my heart if I'm going into a house where somebody did like a really terrible kitchen design and kind of 10 years later we're having to have a debate, is it time to take the kitchen out? Whereas you kind of like to think that if you can put some great cabinets in, there's just a chance that they might be able to last for a very long time.
Sure.
But and if you're buying furniture, you know, I say, you know, try and get a really great sofa, because that's going to be with you for a long time. And it's worth spending money on something that's constructed really beautifully and inside, or buying beautiful bits of antique furniture, which are already 200 or 300 years old, maybe. And you're going to give them a little moment in your life. They're going to outlive you, you know.
Absolutely.
Far.
And
that's
maybe,
fantastic.
but maybe go to your, you know, your family members,
or they might go to your family. Yeah. And so, you know, so that's great. But then the decoration itself is, as it's mutable, it's changeable, and that's fun. It's part of the fun thing of life. And so for me, there are all these different strands which come. There's this sort of, there's this sort of Venn diagram of like, what's the building? There's obviously a bit of me, like if I'm coming in and advising or guiding or helping people, you know, I guess they're coming because I'm going to give them a certain degree of influence and suggestions, which you know, are probably going to relate to things we've done before, in some way, shape, or form. And then most important in all of this, by far, is the person who's going to actually live there. And I tell a little story in the book about one of the houses, one of the beautiful houses in the book, which was just one of my lifetime honors to work on, a wonderful, really historic house in Dorset called Chettle. It's in the sort of country house chapter of the book, where I look at a whole series of the big country houses that we've worked on over the last 15 years. And that one, you know, it was a fantastic decoration project. I was working with a friend of mine who was the restoration architect of the building and did up the kind of, you know, made the building. It was in a terrible condition, and he had a massive task just to kind of restore it and make it all perfect again. Not too perfect, just perfect enough. And then we were helping on colors, wallpapers, fabrics, you know, rugs, lamps, sofas, furniture, decoration. And we were doing some of the interior architectural decoration as well, so paneling design. And we just detailed up the kitchens and the bathrooms and things like that, and fed that into Hugh's, my friend Hugh Petter's overall work. And then, but that project, actually, weirdly, the house, when it first came on the market, it had been on the market for the first time in like 250 years, and there were a lot of people interested in buying it. And it got bought. It's a very special building. It got bought by this young couple who are absolutely great. They had a great sense of energy. They were really fun people. And they knew a little bit about me. I didn't know them, but they knew about me. So they called me in, and I went to go and see it. I was there like a flash. I knew that house. I'd been there on sort of funny, you know, open days when they opened up the garden. And it was like the dream commission. I was so excited. And we were getting going. And then genuinely what happened was they got worried about how much the having to restore the building was going to cost. And it was definitely more than they had initially thought. And he was kind of a young guy. He was he was in the city. He had done very well. But he was young. He was in his 20s. And, you know, he had done fairly well, but maybe not that well. And he was
Sure.
beginning to get a little bit nervous. And I wish that more people in life had this tendency to sort of say, I think I might have just made a mistake. It's very hard to admit mistakes, particularly if you're a city trader, trust me. And he called me up and he said, it's really sad, but I think we've decided to sell the house on. We're biting off more than we can comfortably chew. We're too young. Our kids are too young. I could do it, but I don't want to do it. It's too much.
Yeah.
And I'm worried that I won't have the commitment to see it through. And it was a really powerful thing to admit, for somebody young and ambitious. It was like, okay, I totally respect that. And luckily we hadn't actually started too much work, because that's always the pain when you've done a lot of design work and then something doesn't happen.
Right.
And then bizarrely, amazingly, twist of fate, I had brought in to meet them and to work with them, which was going really well, a landscape architect who's a really good friend of mine called Pip Morrison. We worked together a lot. I also worked together a lot with Pip's husband, Kim Wilkie, but never together. They always work better apart.
How funny.
Although they're husband and husband. But anyway, so Pip is great. So I brought Pip in. I knew he was perfect for the house. And he was also very sad when these guys sold the house on. But then Pip knew already the people who then bought the house from the people who had first bought the house. And then by this weird twist of life, I then got hired back in about 6 months later or something.
Amazing.
To be their interior designer. So it was like really, like, that does not happen very often in life, that particular little thing. If the first guys had proceeded and had just stuck to plan A and had carried on, it would have looked really cool. It would have been great. The building would have been the same. It's still me.
Right.
And it would have looked like one thing. And then the new people came and they were a lot older. They were sort of in their late 50s, early 60s. Their kids had grown up. They were still sort of living at home, but kind of left home. And they had a passion for antique furniture and history. And Tom was just desperate to restore this beautiful building that needed so much love pouring into it. And he was like, it was like a project for him. And it's the most amazing thing that he did. It's incredible, the restoration that they carried out. Very few people have got that sort of energy. And we decorated for them, and it's exactly the same house, and it's me, and it's them, and it's completely, totally different. And what that proved to me is a little kind of experiment, is that in the Venn diagram of the house and me and the owner, the really important person in the mix is the owner. It's not me. It's never me. And it's not. It is the house, because the right house finds the right owner. And in a way, that's probably the simplest explanation I've got as to kind of why there are so many different projects which look so different from one another. I think you can detect themes running through to do with authenticity of detail or love of mixing old and new furniture. Like I love historical decoration, but actually, whereas in our historical buildings, historically inspired buildings, I'm really, really keen that my buildings are sort of totally authentic in feel and flavor and touch. Because of that whole thing I described about the velocity of decoration, I'm a little bit less worried about. I don't think that you need to live just with like Georgian period wallpaper or Georgian furniture or lamps that look like Georgian oil lamps, or, you can really have fun and mix it up if you want. You don't have to. And some people love just that very historical language. They probably wouldn't actually engage me to be their decorator, because I don't really do rooms that just look like that. Like, I do like to bring in flashes of color and
unexpected moments.
Exactly. There's a dialogue about old and new that I find completely fascinating. I love being in historical country houses, for instance. Chatsworth is an amazing example, where the Dukes of Devonshire over many years now have made, like, they've got this incredible collection, one of the most incredible collections in the world of historical art and objects and design. But then they've continued to build that with an incredible, contemporary ceramics or art or paintings, and that, or Houghton Hall in Norfolk, the Marquis of Cholmondeley, is another kind of incredible house where there's this dialogue of taste, of culture, of time, of history bouncing back and forwards. And that for me is very, very exciting and interesting. And that's what decoration brings to life. It's atmosphere. It's infused with an understanding of historical architecture and decoration and design. And, I love designing within a knowledge of the history of interior design. I love that. But it's not, you don't want it to become a sort of, a straitjacket.
Right.
You don't want it to become something that is constricting. I described, I was talking about this with somebody else the other day, and I said, it's a bit like your granny. She's old, but she actually can look quite cool in a leather jacket or a t-shirt. Like, she doesn't just have to wear granny clothes.
Right.
You always want to dress her with respect.
Now I'm picturing my grandmother in a leather jacket.
You don't want to make her look like something she's not, So, anyway.
Well, I've mentioned this before on the podcast. Anytime we have an English designer, but I am always so struck by I feel like the English do the best job at having both like grand and humble together. There's a grand country house, the scale, the proportion, the history, but then there's something about the way the rooms are put together that feels so everyday. And I mean this in the best way possible.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And I don't know if that was
you can still make a mess. I think that there's
maybe it's a cultural thing.
I think it's partly a cultural thing. I do. I think it's partly, I observed this when I was working in America. If we think about an American architect or an American decorator doing English taste, which obviously it's a powerful look. It's kind of like our greatest export industry of all time is like English decoration. It's sort of universally loved around the world as a design language. But very, very often, if you're an American client or an American decorator, quite often your main experience of traditional interior decoration in England is actually not in people's houses. It's in hotels. Like, you're actually staying in really lovely country house hotels or whatever. But inevitably, they're just a tiny bit more polished, comfortable, functional, operational, like put together. They're a bit more put together than a real old English. And some of the country houses in the, some of the country houses in the book, there's a sort of, I mean, if you look at a really beautiful historical house, the famous houses of England, the great country houses of England, which we all know through either visiting them and, when they're open to the public, or you can hundreds of books on historical houses, many produced by Rizzoli. And many written by a great friend of mine called Jeremy Musson, who's a fantastic author on this whole subject. But there's a sort of nonchalance to English decoration, proper how people in England live in their houses, that an awful lot of Americans don't quite have that. They're just, things are just a bit too well done.
It's true. You know what I mean? It's true.
They're a little bit too matchy. They're a little bit too kind of like everything is done in a moment and then kind of laid out on a plate and provided. And I mean, really posh people in England, like really, really posh aristo people in England, they do hire decorators secretly. They very often say to their friends, "Oh, I did all of this myself." But
I didn't
the
know.
one thing, but the one thing that the decorator never gets to do is that much. Like, you're choosing a paint color for the room, and you might be getting a new set of curtains made, and you might be buying one new sofa because the sofa that's been in the room since 1930 has just totally given up the ghost. Or you might be recovering a couple of chairs and moving some things around that you found in the attic or kind of whatever. But what you're not ever doing in a traditional English interior, particularly those big grand ones, you're never starting from scratch. Like, you're never faced with a completely blank room. And then you've got to start. And so there's something about that task of starting with the completely blank room, and then which is how an American house is very often decorated. They're not coming to the building with loads of baggage. And the decorator is given quite a free rein to sort of start from scratch.
And I think that's what often designers would say was like the dream project.
Yeah.
Doing a whole room from zero. Yeah.
That's my nightmare project. I find it totally overwhelming. Starting completely from scratch, where somebody says, I don't have a stick of furniture, I don't have a single painting, I don't have a book. You've got to get me everything.
Right. Because where do you start?
That, for me, is a total nightmare. And one of the things is, it's actually incredibly, it's easy to advise people on sofas and upholstery and ottomans and bits of antique furniture and stuff like that. It is actually relatively easy because there's styles, there's shapes, I can tell you, like, this is my go-to company to go and buy sofas. Like, go and sit in them. They've got a fantastic Howard and Sons. They've got a great workshop in Camden. They'll make your cushions for you exactly how you like them. They're kind of the Rolls Royce of sofas, or the Bentley of sofas. And, they're going to stand the test of time. Everybody loves a Howard and Sons sofa. And so that's fine. Where it gets really tough for me, I really struggle buying things which are personal for people, like pictures. I really find it hard to buy a painting for somebody, because for me, you shouldn't be choosing a painting because it matches an interior or actually clashes with an interior, whatever. It shouldn't be the same as the cushion. It's like a different thing. It's an art. It's an object. It's an art object. It was painted. It was created by a person at some stage, maybe very recently, maybe in history. It's not something to kind of like add the little kind of dash of lemon to your decoration scheme, or necessarily even to be the starting point of the decoration scheme. These things are very personal, and you need that sense of personal engagement with people. I think it's like buying libraries for people. And there are one or two people I know in the world who will buy a library for somebody who has no books, where it feels totally convincing, like that this is the library of a person who has collected a lot of books.
We need to have them on the podcast. That sounds fascinating.
Kinsey.
Okay.
Kinsey Marable.
I'm going to write that
He's
down.
my great friend. Yeah, definitely. And his house is in this month's Quarter's Frederick magazine. I think he's on the cover. He's a great friend, and he's fantastic. And he's, and there are people here. Hayward Hill Bookstore in London will build a beautiful library for you. But all too often, even that, if you go through the danger, as I see time after time after time in the monthly decoration mags, flicking on my book, on my desk, it's kind of, you can just see that the decoration assistant was going click, 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 click on Amazon.com through the Taschen website and various other, and just, a whole series of packaged books that we've just all seen the spines again and again. I don't know, something, I'm not going to name and shame the brands of those books, but we all know them. We know them so well that CGI companies producing CGI illustrations.
Oh, they put them into software?
Oh, they've got all of those books in software, literally perfectly, the perfect spines. Yeah. So, and there has to be that degree of personality, and it comes through those nuanced little bits and pieces, which I somewhat struggle with orchestrating and buying. I mean, if we have to, we will, and we embrace it. We go for it. I mean, I had one client, I'm not going to tell you which one, their house is in the book. And shortly before they were due to move in, very sadly, he and his wife separated. And she took a lot of the bits and pieces. And to start with, that house felt like a bit like a sort of furniture showroom, because it had some very nice furniture, had some very nice curtains, it had nice table lamps in the right place, but it didn't have any stuff. And he was not the person who had the ability or the knowledge or the time, actually, let alone the interest. He wasn't really interested in going shopping. He's not a shopper. He likes doing skiing or kind of sailing or kind of running and things like that. That's how he wants to spend his downtime. So the project decorator, I was like, okay, your job is to become this guy's wife for a while.
Yeah. Shove it. Yeah.
Beautiful personal things. And we did it. And it's actually very well done. But it's quite unusual for us. Sure. I much prefer somebody who's got a lot of baggage, and I will always work with it. I will always make a way to work. If something literally doesn't work, but they love it, it's still theirs, and they must be allowed to have it. But from time to time, if I'm taking a photograph of the room, I might be just moving that one.
Conveniently cropped out of the book.
Yes, sorry, it wasn't in that page. Yeah, exactly. But that's how it is. It has to be personal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Ben, you were conscious of our podcast being named How to Decorate, and I am conscious of the fact that I have watched an entire sunset and it get dark in your window.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned for you because I think it's like 9 o'clock there?
It's only 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock,
so
okay.
That's okay.
So,
yeah.
As I would love to chat for as long as you're available, but... we have taken up. Yeah. Okay.
10 minutes, and then one more question,
okay,
and then we must do one more question because there's the.
Would you like to do the decorating dilemma?
There's the design
dilemma.
Yes,
we can do our design dilemma.
But do you have any more? Is there anything more we should be talking about?
Oh my gosh! I mean, well, I did want to talk to you about the photography because
we could do podcast series kind of. Well, that's another whole. That's crazy.
With how much you have on your plate, I was so surprised to read that you decided to take on doing all the photography for the book.
It's a little weird.
Yeah. And I there was a part where, we were talking about, I think you used the word nonchalance to the rooms, which I love that. It perfectly describes it. But there was points in the book where I was like, I wonder if this is because he has said that he's taken a very light hand to the styling, maybe some flowers or something.
Yeah.
And the photography, or is that just, the homeowners and the way that it's designed? So I loved, I guess, seeing how natural it looked, I guess. Like it truly looked as though you'd just walked in and taken a photo. Maybe after their housekeeper had left, but, on an average day.
Exactly. So what happened was, as you know, every single book ever produced in the sort of this type of book, there's an industry of fantastic photographers. That's what they do. That they're incredibly talented, but it's a big deal, and it's lighting, it's assistants, it's kind of like it's a big thing, and. What I began to learn quite early on is that the photographers who are great at taking photographs of the atmosphere of an interior, if I'm brutally honest, were really struggling to take a photograph of a modern housing development. And obviously half of the projects, which I was, well, not half, but, there are three of those projects in the book. Where there's a whole separate subtlety to kind of like, oh my gosh, it's like being patient. It's like it's like if you were a fisherman, waiting for hours to catch a fish. Like it's all about being there at the right place at the right time, which sometimes means getting up at an absolute moment's notice, like literally seeing that there was going to be a perfect sunrise in the far end of Cornwall tomorrow morning. And at 2 a.m, despite the fact that we had people staying in our house for the weekend, I was like, set my alarm clock, off I drove. I was down there at 5 a.m, having driven for 3 hours. I took photos for 45 minutes, exactly the shots that I knew that I wanted to get of the developments in Truro. And then turned around, stopped to get a takeout coffee from a petrol station, and then drove home. And all of my friends were just waking up for breakfast. And I was like,
gosh.
I've just been and back.
But I know which photo you're talking about, and it was gorgeous.
Yeah.
So it was worth it.
So it actually was worth it. All the photos of Tawna Grain. And actually the skill of taking a photograph on the outside and the inside is two different things. It's all about achieving in a sense of atmosphere. But as you say, also for me, not making things look too polished. And so one of the things which I've observed, I mean, over years of our studio work being photographed by proper grown-up official photographers, is they've got a particular way of working, which is they come into a room, and it's kind of understandable if you think about how they work and what their role is. They're the photographer, right? So they come in and they decide where they're going to put their tripod and their lens, and then everything else in the space has to be moved in order to kind of fit the frame. So I have spent hours of my life with nice people kind of moving sofas an inch, 2 inches back, inch forward, moving the sofas behind the lamps, unplugging things, kind of moving the rug a fraction because it's just not quite set, like insane amount of moving things around. And then they take their photograph and then they go off into the next room and decide where to put the camera down. And the rest of us have to spend the next 2 hours putting it all back.
Right.
And then you start the process again. And actually, as a result of that, you might, off a busy shoot, you might get 8 photos in a day or 10 photos in a day if you're lucky. And there's one photographer who should remain totally nameless. He's actually fantastic photographer. I love working with him. But he came to my house in Dorset, and all day he took 4 photographs. It was like insane.
You'd never finish the book at that pace.
No, I wouldn't. And they're all on quite hefty day rates as well, as I'm sure you know. So I taught myself how to use a camera. I talk about it in the beginning. I was taught by this fantastic guy who's actually the maestro, who does all the post-production work and the sort of stitching together different exposures to get nice daylight through the window and blah, 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 blah. It's all technical, busy stuff. Peter Dixon, absolutely fantastic, my total lifesaver. And he had been the assistant to Jan, Jan Baldwin was the photographer of my first 2 books, who I loved working with her. But she couldn't leave that publisher and come and work with Fritzoli. That would have been too controversial. So she gave me Peter's details, and he literally held my hand all the way through. And in the early days, he was there on the sheets. And then as time went on, I kind of, just by observation, watched what he was doing, and I got my head around it. I still don't really know what I'm doing, but I got my head around it enough that I knew enough to actually and I've always enjoyed composing photographs, and I've always enjoyed the process of photography. I've written a blog for kind of 20 years, and I've loved it. But this is different because you're kind of driving a big, complicated machine. And then what I realized very quickly was that if I was going to manage this on my own, which is much easier, it was much more nimble. It meant that I could be much more in tune with weather and atmosphere. And, if I knew there was going to be mist one morning, I was out, or whatever it might be. And if I was going to manage this on my own, you actually can't. There just isn't time to spend like setting up your vision around the camera and then shifting everything. It just takes forever. And weirdly, so I just learned that it's a lot easier to move the tripod around until you compose a nice shot than to put the tripod where you first put it and then to move the furniture around to get the nice shot. And so that's how I've learned to do it. And I think as time went on, and there are some photos in the book that were taken really early days, and there are some which are much, much later, obviously. And that's just what happens. And I think there's a language which has evolved through the photography. And there are some photographs which really, they are kind of like, this is it. I just came in and took a photo. Yeah. And I did take, if there was a sort of like really hideous copy of a financial magazine on top of the books, I might sort of like, whoop, just pop that to one side. But not creating something that is like a sort of totally sterile kind of thing. And I think it has given, now that I've got the book here in front of me, but it does have a personality about it as a result, which I hope means that people will want to go back to it, because it is quite personal. It's personal in the writing, it's personal in the projects, it's personal in, I wrote it all. It wasn't ghostwritten by anyone. I wrote every single word. I took every single photo. It's a bit weird because I also designed every single building.
Yeah.
Not quite.
And did all the decor.
Yeah. And so I think because of that, it feels quite different, particularly, I don't know if you've had a physical copy yet. We must get you one, but it's a chunky monkey thing. It's like,
amazing.
It's heavy. But I think it's something which, like what you said at the beginning, that you can sort of dip into, obviously, but I hope it's something which people will enjoy, you know, a little bit how we were talking about in our projects, you know, sort of there's breadth, but there's hopefully a bit of depth. And
Oh,
people
there
will enjoy
is.
the
Yeah.
digging. Just for a start, I will say I spent a lot of time thinking and writing captions. The whole separate little
gosh.
story through all the captions. Whereas the number of times you pick up a decoration book these days, and everything else is wrote, but it feels like the captions have been written by an AI machine.
Mm-hmm.
It just says stuff that you could already see.
You're so right. You're so right. I really appreciated that you wrote it yourself, and I could tell. And
yeah, it was fun.
Because there's substance.
It's a bit exhausting from time to time, but it was but it was great. It's been a really fantastic process. Right, design dilemma, decoration.
Yes,
dilemma.
we're gonna do that. There was one room in particular I just had to call out to you. You may have not even noticed it, but there was one kitchen, and this is where I was like, "See, this is so approachable. I love this. This is why I'm going to revisit it." There's one kitchen, and there was a it was a blue island. And at the bottom of the island, it was like storage space. And there was what looked like an inflatable shark. Yes. And I was like, this is fabulous. Because this is what real people.
That is.
It was great.
Okay. I'll tell you about that kitchen. But if you want to see kind of what that kitchen looked like when we first finished and when the professional photographers took the photos, that house got photographed about 8 years ago or 10 years ago by House and Garden magazine in the UK. And if you type in Ben Pentreath blue kitchen into the internet, I guarantee that will kind of swamp you, because it was on the cover and it became just one of those rooms that it did the rounds on Instagram. It went crazy. And they're very beautiful photographs. I can't actually remember.
Oh, it's a gorgeous space.
But they were lovely. And then they've had kids, and the kids have got, like, new little brothers and sisters popping along and like blah, blah, blah. And there is a lot of stuff now wedged into that kitchen island. And when it was first done, it was like a big series of 3 big terracotta bowls or something, like things that like kitchen stuff that never get touched. They're just antiques in the corner. And then very quickly, I don't know where those have gone. I haven't seen them in years. But now it's just wedged with toys and stuff like that. Yeah. So I was in there taking photos, and I was on my own. And I was like, if I even touch this, it's going to take me 10 hours to take it all out, and it's going to take me 15 hours to put it all back, and I just don't have the patience. So I'm just going to, and it has slightly annoyed. I've shown the book to 1 or 2 people, and they've gone, really? And I was like, didn't you even want to take the plastic shark out? And I said, as soon as I took one thing out, then I'd never be able to stop. It'd be like
like, what's the line?
Unraveling a piece of wool, on a sweater.
Well, I have 2 kids, so this made me feel so much better about myself, because I was like, see, look, the inflatable shark made it into the book, so I'm good.
Exactly. Excellent. Good. I'm glad you liked that. It's a favorite house.
And it would be a great little sort of like scavenger hunt for our listeners to go find the inflatable shark.
Exactly. Yes. Very good.
All right. Well, let's do Braden's decorating dilemma, and then I will let you go to bed. Hi, I love listening to your podcast every week and look forward to new episodes for my drive into work. My dilemma is actually for the exterior of my house. I'm planning to work on some landscaping for the front, but I'm stumped otherwise. I don't like how it feels a bit dated and not cohesive. With the 4 different colors and materials, it's definitely a bit builder grade. The siding is vinyl, so I will be leaving that, but have thought about painting the brick to match, adding window grids, painting the shutters and front door. Should I leave the brick or paint it? Paint the shutters, leave the shutters, add shutters to the bottom windows. Tell me what to think.
Yeah, it was a great question. The first thing I thought, the sort of slight elephant in the room, a little bit, is the garage door and the. When she was mentioning the the landscaping, I think that's absolutely crucial. You've got this lawn and you've got the kind of the front driveway. And I think the really first question I'd ask here, it's an interesting one, is like, is the garage actually being used for car storage? Because, my parents had a garage, which was absolutely massive, which they obviously filled up with a million things, and that's kind of normal. But they also kept their car in it every night. Like, my dad had a brand new car, but he was just that generation that I have to put my car in the garage every night. Otherwise, it's going to disintegrate or melt in the rain, or it's going to be stolen. They lived in a very safe place. Like now, people don't really put their car away ever.
Right.
So one thought I had is like, that is a massive, beautiful, big room in there by the looks of things. And I wondered whether, I mean, maybe not for right now, but, you know, in time, does that actually become part of your living accommodation of the house? And you could take out the giant garage door, which is quite unfriendly. It's like, it's kind of like,
and it's so white.
It's so white. It goes back to what we were talking about with the, you know, right at the beginning, a world designed around cars. The most important thing in that house at the moment is the car, or the garage, the storage for the car. So I was thinking, wow, that could make an amazing room with windows and doors and French doors. And you could have a beautiful patio or something outside it, a garden right outside it. And the car could just be in the foreground, parked. I'm assuming that the access street is kind of right behind us. And then I was also thinking about the amazing roof up there in the garage. That's another big roof, and that would look really beautiful with a little dormer window or something to break up that roof, but actually bring light into that space. You might be able to do some fun things there. Anyway, that's like kind of not answering the question which we were asked to do. I would definitely add grids on the windows, or glazing bars, you know, as they're called in England, so that because the two big panes, top and bottom, is quite it's quite starey. It's a little bit unfriendly looking. And if they can, with a local joiner or carpenter, I don't know if the windows are made of timber or plastic, probably timber, because I think she's talking about painting them. But if they can, just plant on the outside glazing bars, just nicely detailed, and divide them up equally so that the top and bottom panes, at the moment, they're one pane of glass. Split them into 3 panes wide and 2 panes high, so that each pane is called 6 over 6. So it's got 6 panes over 6 panes. I know from just looking at the shape of the windows, they will look really nice, much nicer. So I think that's a really great thing to do. The second thing I would recommend is that the shutters either need to actually come off the house entirely, or if the owner would like shutters, for me, they need to be taken off, and then she needs to put bigger ones on because they're too small to actually shut over the windows.
Right.
And that always really annoys me, because then it looks like the shutters are totally fake because they can't move. They're stuck on. And if you did wrench them off the wall and shut them over the windows, there'd still be a massive gap.
Right.
In other words, they're not really doing what they pretending to do anyway. My advice actually might be just to take them off. I think they make the facade look a little bit busier than they need to. And rather than painting them, I would just kind of remove them. Now, there might be somewhere they can be reused in, like in the garden, in a little structure by a greenhouse or something like that. You might be able to do something with them creatively, but I would take them off the facade and I think it would look better.
Okay.
So then if we move downstairs to the brick, I agree that I think there are too many materials going on and it looks a little bit discordant. I think that I wouldn't add shutters down there because actually you've got the porch, the veranda, so you don't really need additional shade kind of for the windows. And I think that either to replicate the same siding in the same color and to carry that down, that material down, I think would look much better. Or if that doesn't quite work from a technical point of view, or from, you know, it's too expensive to add siding, then I would definitely paint the lower portion the same color as the siding to match. But I think it would look actually nicer if you did the whole thing in siding.
Okay.
The big posts on the veranda, they're quite chunky and square. Again, it could be too expensive and too complicated to do anything about those. But if you could do something about those, they would look nicer if it was slightly thinner timber posts.
Okay.
Maybe with a little bracket or something, just to sort of finish off up top. And then obviously what would be really fun, I don't know which way the house faces, what the direction is, but it would be really fun to have a bench or some chairs or something out there. Just even if you're not really going to sit out there, it gives the idea that you could sit out there,
right?
And it just looks a little bit friendlier.
What about paint color? I mean,
I would if the sort of pale sandy color, the sort of mushroomy color of the siding can't be changed, which I do understand. If it's a vinyl siding, it's probably that wouldn't be a good idea to paint it because it'll probably just peel off in 5 years or something. You might be able to find a color which could a paint type that can stick on. But if that's not part of the go, then I would keep those walls, obviously that color, and I would keep the trim white or off-white.
Okay.
I think that looks good. And then the door, I can't quite tell what color the door is, but I think
Looks
it's sort
like
of
green.
blue.
Oh, blue?
Blue or green.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than, because the shutters look like they're black.
Mhm.
I think that's a nice color for the door. I mean, you could do any color with the door. It could be literally any color is going to go with that sandy palette. Could be green, could be blue, could be red, could be whatever you love. And then I think that planting is the thing. If you could break up the width of the driveway, if you could get more plants climbing up the house, that would be a beautiful thing. You know, to encourage some climbing plants.
She's got the perfect place for that, for like a climbing rose.
Yeah, and you've got
train it up
right there. Yeah,
one side, have it go over the porch, over to where the garage door is.
It would make a massive difference. It would really soften the whole thing.
Yeah.
It would really, really soften it down, and it would look fantastic.
Yeah, the softness of planting is going to make a huge difference.
Exactly. There's a very famous American architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, and he has a perfect expression. Not that I'm applying it to this building, but it's one which if from time to time we do something where I'm like, whoops, that hasn't quite worked. And you say, maybe we should just put a climbing plant up here. Frank said, doctors can bury their mistakes. Architects must resort to plants.
I've never heard that before, but I love that.
Yeah, you can look it up on Wikipedia. It's not the precise words, but it's basically doctors can bury their mistakes. Architects must resort to planting.
Well, it'll give your house a little mystery, Braden, which I think is nice.
It would really soften it. It would really soften it, and it would add a layer. It would really add a layer. Yeah.
Ben,
Great.
I cannot thank you enough. This was wonderful. I could talk to you really for another hour, but I won't do that. Yes.
It's really lovely to meet you, Caroline.
Yes, likewise.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks very much. Really enjoyed it.
And that's our show. You can find all of the show notes on our blog, howtodecorate.com/podcast.
To send in a decorating dilemma, email your questions to podcast@ballarddesigns.net so we can help you with your space.
And of course, be sure to follow us on social media at Ballard Designs.
Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And please leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback.
Until next time, happy
decorating!